We're going to move on now to the home, so from the industrial to the domestic. Our next guest is all too familiar within the halls of Web Summit. His journey began here not so long ago as a startup full of ambition. SmartThings first launched on Kickstarter, raising 1.2 million in funds. Since then, SmartThings have built something which Samsung simply couldn't refuse. I must say it's a very cool company. It offers accessibility, connecting your phone to just an amazing array of gadgets. It can monitor anything from when your kids come home from school, setting rules to turn off your lights, and even brewing your coffee in the morning. I think Jeff, my Irish mammy, has been waiting for you all her life. So here to tell us where their journey is going next, would you please welcome to the stage Jeff Hagins, CTO and co-founder of SmartThings.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm going to talk a bit this morning about the smart home and defining what the smart home really means. First, though, I want to take a minute to talk about this term, the Internet of Things. So I've spent the last few years now working in this field that we call the Internet of Things, and I have to say that without uncertainty, that I really, really hate this term. Right? I mean, after all, we don't call it the Internet of Information Access, or the Internet of digitized social relationships, or the Internet of mobile communications, but for some reason we decided to call it the Internet of Things. And even if we did call it by those other names, at least they're functional descriptions, right? This actually doesn't tell me anything about the use case. And I was wondering the other day about what other people defined the Internet of Things as. And I went to the Oxford English Dictionary and was pleased and ultimately dismayed to find this definition: a proposed development of the Internet in which everyday objects have network connectivity, allowing them to send and receive data. And I wondered, what kinds of objects connect to the Internet that don't send and receive data, right? And then they went on to use the term in a sentence, right, to illustrate what it means. If one thing can prevent the Internet of Things from transforming the way in which we live and work, it will be a breakdown in security. And I thought, well, that's really useful for my business, right, to point out that the most important thing to worry about is a failure in security. But at least they acknowledge that it does have the potential to transform the way in which we live and work. But it got me to wondering about this term, which is a little bit closer to what we do at SmartThings, the smart home, and wondering how people define smart home. So naturally, I went and looked that up as well, and here's what I found: a home equipped with lighting, heating, and electronic devices that can be controlled remotely by a phone or computer. So apparently a smart home just means remote control. Well, that wasn't very satisfying, because we certainly have a different definition of that. They also used it in a sentence. You can contact your smart home on the Internet to make sure that dinner is cooked, the central heating is on, the curtains are drawn, and the gas fire is roaring in the grate when you get home. And similarly, it didn't really do much for me in terms of this definition of what a smart home means, because it defined an end state, but it didn't tell us how we got there. And I thought, well, let's define it. You know, maybe it's time to actually put a better definition behind smart home. And I kept digging. I decided to look at the word smart and see what it meant. And it says, having or showing a quick-witted intelligence. And once again, it didn't tell me a whole lot. Quick-witted. What does that mean? So I kept digging. Quick-witted. Showing or characterized by an ability to think or respond quickly or effectively. And I thought, oh, now we're getting somewhere, right? If I can respond, if my home can respond quickly and effectively, that has some specific meaning. Except, what does respond mean? So I looked up respond. Respond is to say something in reply, right, or to react to a stimulus. And I thought, oh, this is also interesting, right? This tells me something about what a smart home should be able to do. It should be able to communicate. It should be able to talk to me and tell me what's going on. And it should be able to react to a stimulus, to an event, to something happening within the home. But let's go back to the other term, intelligence, quick-witted intelligence. We know what quick-witted means now, right? The ability to respond quickly and effectively where responding means to communicate or to react. But what does intelligence mean? And this was the definition I found: the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. And again, I thought, wow, that's really interesting, that a smart home should be intelligent. It should actually be able to acquire new knowledge and new skills to make itself better over time. So what have we figured out? Let's review. A smart home should be quick-witted, which means it can respond quickly, which means it can communicate and react. And it should be intelligent, which means it should be able to acquire and apply new knowledge and skills. And I looked at this and I thought, oh my God, do you see it? Look what happens. It's a smart home. That's a bit cheeky, I know. But so we're starting to build a definition here. Yeah? Smart home, a home with the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills that can communicate and react quickly to do what? Well, this is where the dictionary didn't help me out. So we had to figure this out ourselves. And we've been doing that at SmartThings for the past 3 years. To do things that you can't do. To do things that you don't want to do. To save you time. To save you money, that's a big one. To prevent disasters, right? Stop the flood in the basement before it does damage. To make you healthier, right? Be able to tell you when the filters on the air conditioning system are no longer functioning correctly. To make you safer. And if I summarize all those things, I might get something like this: to solve real problems, conserve resources, and make life better. But I was still noodling this thing about, well, how does a smart home acquire knowledge and skills, right? Where those knowledge and skills involve both hardware and software. And that's when I realized that in this Internet of Things industry, as much as I hate the term, and in the smart home industry, we've got a bit of a problem. And that's a lack of standards. And by that, I do not mean a lack of people trying to define standards. There's an explosion of different standards bodies that are coming up now trying to define standards for the Internet of Things. But by that, I mean that we actually have a lack of adopted standards, a lack of real things that make it easy to acquire skills into the home by buying a new device, getting it connected, getting it installed, and having it work within this context of what we call the smart home. And I get asked all the time, Jeff, which standards are going to win, right? What should I make the bet on, right? I get asked this typically by device manufacturers, right? Where should we go? We've got, we want to build a connected pet feeder, right? Which standard should we use? Because we want to make the right bet. And my response is very simple. Right? I have no idea. What I do know is that the standards for the Internet of Things and the connected home are going to have certain characteristics. So let's look at a few of those. What are the things that are going to characterize the successful standards for the smart home? Mesh networking. It's pretty clear that we need a mesh networking standard that devices can make use of. Not everything can connect to Wi-Fi. You don't want everything to connect to Wi-Fi. And furthermore, what I really need is to have a battery-operated device where the battery lasts for about 10 years before I have to replace it, right? That's not Wi-Fi, right? But it could be mesh networking. TCP/IP, right? We have mesh networking standards today, but they're not IP-based, and that actually makes it more difficult to talk to those devices. It takes special radios, it takes special software, it takes gateways like the one my company produces. An IP-based world would simply be a bit easier in terms of integration. Both local and remote access. I need standards that tell me how to talk to the device locally within the home, but also how to talk to it remotely. And ideally, that should look very much the same. It should be nearly the same standard whether I'm local or remote. cloud federation. One thing that's becoming quite clear is that when we talk about connected devices, that how you connect to that device remotely may involve a manufacturer-specific cloud, and yet there are no standards for how I talk to, for example, the GE Wink cloud versus the Samsung cloud. Those are two entirely different things. We need standards for how to talk to these devices in the cloud and how to federate across all those things so that a single identity could actually talk across devices connected to different device clouds. We need an application layer or a semantic standard as well, right, that tells us exactly how to talk to the device. If I'm talking to a connected refrigerator, then at some level, all refrigerators need to speak the same language. Because as a developer, I don't want to write software for a specific refrigerator. I'd like to write software that works with any refrigerator, or turns on any light bulb, or locks any door. And platforms like SmartThings solve for that today, but we actually shouldn't need to. If we had the right standards, we wouldn't need to solve for that problem. Top to bottom security, right? The standards actually need to tell us how to deal with security, whether I'm accessing that device in the cloud or whether I'm talking to it on the local network. I need a way to secure that device and to control who has access to it, no matter where they are. And the device itself needs to understand the security model. It needs to be able to enforce security itself. Finally, the standards need to be supported by open source software, right? We don't want closed standards. We don't want proprietary standards. We want open standards, and that means open source standards, so that they can evolve and the community can participate in evolving those standards. So when I look at this, and I look at the landscape of standards that are being proposed or developed as we speak, a couple of them stand out. And I want to give a shout out to those two standards, or those two standards in development, because they're not standards yet. One is work being done by the Open Interconnect Consortium, the OIC. And the OIC is trying to define a set of standards that actually go from the local network, define the application or semantic standard, and go all the way to the cloud as well to deal with remote access, security, etc. What the OIC doesn't define, though, is the actual network layer, the actual transport. There's another group, though, called Thread, the Thread group, that actually does define that, and it defines it for a mesh network. It defines it based on 802.15.4, using TCP/IP or 6LoWPAN for the IP layer. And interestingly, these two standards have the potential, if they don't muck it up, they have the potential to actually be compatible, that a single device could actually be Thread compatible and OIC compatible and support both those standards at the same time. Really interesting work being done by these two groups. And as a disclaimer, SmartThings and Samsung are part of both of these two groups and fully supporting the work being done by these two groups. So back to my rant, my definitional rant. We talked about adding skills, and if we can get these standards resolved, it'll be easy to add new skills to a home in terms of hardware and software. The software is actually the easy part, right? Wiring up the world, that's the hard part. But it caused me to go look up the definition of skill as well. And I realized, and I'm not going to read this one to you, I realized, though, in reading the definition of skill, that when we talk about a skill, it's always talked about in human terms, right? The carpentry skill, the dancer, the cabinet maker. It's human skills, and that made me realize something important, that when we talk about the ability to acquire knowledge and skills, we need to make sure that we don't leave out the human, right? Because you're part of the smart home. You're going to live in it, right? And the ability for the home to take advantage of your skills is just as important as being able to take advantage of machine skills, of device and software skills. So when we look at that ability, we're really talking about human skills, devices and software, and ultimately machine intelligence. And when we look at human skills, there's two forms that those skills take. you, or the inhabitants of the home, but also professional services, right? People who are providing services to the home. That a smart home should actually be able to reach out and get professional services to come solve problems, because there are limits, right? If the smart home detects the flood under your kitchen sink, right, it can tell you about it, communicate. It can react quickly. It can actually shut off the water. If you've got a controllable water valve, we can shut the water off and prevent damage. But I can't actually fix the problem with the smart home. Well, at least not yet, right? I actually need to call the plumber and get the plumber out to fix the leak. And so our definition of the smart home includes these professional services. We believe that the smart home should actually transform the supply chain, the value chain for the home, so that at that point where you've had the leak, you've shut off the water automatically to prevent damage, right? That the next thing the smart home should do is to ask you if you want to call a plumber, and to find that plumber, schedule an appointment, and get them on the way to the house for you, right? So that they can solve the root cause of the problem. And when we look at devices and software and machine intelligence, these two things are very clearly going to ultimately come together in robotics, right? Machines that are capable of moving around the home and performing work on your behalf. We've got simple examples of this today with the robot vacuum cleaner, right? But we're going to see over the coming years an explosion of these types of devices as well. Not just devices that are fixed in the home and stuck in a wall somewhere, but devices that can actually move around, solve problems, and do chores or tasks on your behalf. So now we're finally getting to a more complete definition of the smart home. Let's look at it. A smart home is a home with the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills in the form of software and machine intelligence, standards-based connected devices, human support and professional services that can communicate and react quickly and automatically to solve real problems, conserve resources, and make life better. And so now, you know, when I say that at SmartThings, our vision is to make every home into a smart home, you know exactly what I mean. Thank you.